All right, Doug, thank you so much. Again, former President Trump right now is in Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention, but this image right here does show you Mar-a-Lago as we get to the latest here on this breaking story we're following. The federal judge presiding over the classified documents case of the former president in Florida has dismissed the prosecution, siding with defense lawyers who said the special counsel who filed the charges was illegally appointed. I do want to talk more about all of this here, so let's bring in a guest. We have Andrew Cherkasky, a former federal prosecutor. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us as we follow this breaking story.
It's good to be with you.
All right, so first off, the big question here, is this a surprise? Because you see the information start to come out that the case has been dismissed. Is this surprising to you?
Well, this is certainly a major victory for Donald Trump. It is not a surprise if you look at the kind of issue that's before the court, in that Jack Smith was never a Senate-confirmed U.S. attorney. He was not an officer under the kind of constitutional ideas of what that means. And so he's an outsider who was brought in to do the DOJ's job in prosecuting the former president. So this has been something that has long been identified as a very serious issue in the prosecution against Donald Trump. Now, others have attempted to essentially challenge the appointment of the special prosecutor program that currently exists within the Department of Justice, namely Hunter Biden. He was unsuccessful in his bid to challenge the special counsel that was appointed, Robert Hur, in that case. But that case is different on a number of different grounds, specifically the idea that Hur is, in fact, the U.S. attorney in the state of Delaware and then was given the special counsel position, which gave him broader authority than just in Delaware. Now, in the Jack Smith situation, this idea suggests that he should have never been acting in the role that he has. I believe Judge Cannon is essentially taking some of the ideas that was put forth by Justice Thomas in the immunity decision in that case. Now, it's a over 90-page decision by Judge Cannon, so I have not gotten through all of the bits and pieces of it. It's only surprising in that this is kind of an outlying issue that was still pending before the court, something that they was kind of peripheral to many of the substantive issues that were still being fought in the court. So this is a big deal for Donald Trump.
Yeah, for sure. And what implications could it have on, I guess, other cases? Because my first thought was about the Hunter Biden case, but you're saying this really isn't going to have any effect on that, right?
This case is, the decision of Judge Cannon here is certainly going to go up on appeal. It's going to start at the circuit court and then likely work its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. There's a long history in our country of having these special counsel or special prosecutors be appointed for high-profile cases, especially those where there is a conflict of interest within the Department of Justice. So it's going to be kind of a review of the history of how this has all taken place. And ultimately, I think the Supreme Court is likely going to set some sort of new standard as to how a special counsel comes to be. We can go back, I guess, about 30 years to the Bill Clinton era, when we remember Kenneth Starr was appointed as a special prosecutor against Bill Clinton. And that had just so much publicity that went on with that, and we all kind of knew his name as a household name. But that was different because he was appointed by Congress to lead the special prosecution or the special investigation against Bill Clinton. Then in, I believe, right around the 2000s, the DOJ shifted from this congressional appointment of special counsel to a DOJ appointment, where it's the Attorney General who appoints a special counsel. And so for the last 20 years or so, there have been these Department of Justice appointments that have gone on. We even can remember the Mueller report in Donald Trump's first administration. That was as a result of a special counsel as well. So that didn't result in a prosecution, so there's nothing to overturn in that regard. But I do think that this is going to create a big picture review of how special counsels are appointed, and I think that's going to come from likely guidance from the Supreme Court when this case goes all the way up.
There are several cases that have been filed against the former president. This one was widely considered to be maybe the top tier when you're looking at the severity of them. Why is that?
Well, this case was looked at by those who thought that President Trump should be prosecuted and ultimately convicted as a very strong case because it's just a document-based case. The documents were not where they were supposed to be. They were classified documents. And so if the classified documents weren't in a secured vault or weren't in the White House, then by default, it's a crime. It's the misuse or the mishandling of classified records. That's the simplistic approach to looking at this case. And so those who were energized by that took that simple approach and said, oh, well, then he'll be convicted of that. The case is actually far more nuanced and far more complicated than that. And it starts with the idea that a president has essentially unilateral control over classified documents. A president doesn't carry a classification level. They are the classification authority. And so they also have the right to declassify it or use the information that they gain in the execution of their duties as the executive. So that's kind of the first layer of problems. There's been history of that being essentially granted to a president to have that wide authority over classified documents. Then you have the Presidential Records Act, which is a specific law that allows a president to essentially have control over those documents and declare that some of those documents are personal in nature. And the president is given wide authority to do that. Bill Clinton was given that authority, and essentially the court said that you couldn't go back and review which documents were or were not, or were they appropriately placed into the personal record category or not. And so Donald Trump, in having these records at Mar-a-Lago, had a very strong case that he all along had the authority to have those documents, that they were no longer classified, or that the classification was an irrelevant issue as to his possession of those documents. And then furthermore, there was the kind of ongoing issue of Donald Trump was engaged with the National Archive in terms of which documents should or should not be returned to the National Archives and which ones could be kept by him. It was, as I call it, kind of a civil law matter, something that could have potentially been a lawsuit, but not a criminal case against him. And so, I mean, that's just an introduction to the many layers of the complexity, but many have tried to simplify this case to say that it was an easy case or a slam dunk. It never was, and many of those issues that I'm talking about aren't even going to be analyzed, assuming this dismissal is held up.
And obviously, we've gone over a lot of information. We just showed the pictures of the boxes that were found in Mar-a-Lago. A lot of people have seen those photos. They have a basic understanding of exactly what happened here and the charges that Trump faced. But for folks who haven't been following this that closely there, can you kind of break down the basics of how we got to this point?
So we have those famous pictures of all of these boxes, these banker boxes kind of stacked on top of each other at various places within Mar-a-Lago. To go back, we have to understand all of these records seem to have come from the time that Donald Trump was in the White House as the president of the United States. Some of these records, actually a fairly limited number of the records, seem to indicate that they were classified by the nature of the cover letter on top of them or stamps on the on these few documents that listed them as being classified. Now, that cover letter or the stamp itself doesn't make something automatically classified, but there is at least some decent arguments there that at least some of the documents were at some point classified. Now, after Donald Trump left office, or actually while he was leaving office, many of these banker boxes were moved to his personal residence at Mar-a-Lago. How that movement happened is a little unclear. And in fact, it was government agents and government moving company or a government contracted moving company who moved many of these things. So there's kind of a lack of evidence or lack of knowledge right now as to exactly what Donald Trump said should move or not move, or how that debate took place. In any event, it made its way to Mar-a-Lago. And once at Mar-a-Lago, after some time, the head of the National Archives, who is in charge of maintaining presidential records effectively, said that those records that they felt were missing belonged back at the National Archives. And so a debate essentially began between the National Archives and Donald Trump's attorneys. There was a debate kind of along the way. Donald Trump's team had effectively said that they would secure or keep those records in a safe manner pending the outcome of the dispute between the National Archives and Mr. Trump. In the meantime, the National Archives referred the case to the Department of Justice, saying that they believed that it was a crime what was going on. And so once the DOJ DOJ had it, they eventually appointed Jack Smith as special counsel. And that's because the Department of Justice has certain rules that require appointment of a special counsel when there's a conflict of interest. In this case, that being the competition, I guess, between the political alliances here, Donald Trump being a Republican and the Department of Justice being controlled at this point by Merrick Garland and ultimately overseen by Joe Biden, all Democrats. And so that's effectively, Jack Smith gets involved. A raid on Mar-a-Lago occurs where they find those banker boxes. There's a lot of dispute about it, effectively where they were found or the nature of how they were found. Some photographs of the FBI during the raid suggested that they were kind of strewn about and very easily accessible. Later on, that turns out that many of those documents were kind of laid out and staged in a photograph. And then the prosecution began. And that's where we find ourselves today. Now, there's been many different legal issues that have been filed as time has gone by, but this one is an overarching issue which effectively calls into question the ability of Jack Smith, the special counsel, to have prosecuted this case in the first place. And if he can't prosecute it, then what are we doing here? We have to only get ourselves into a criminal courtroom with an appropriately appointed prosecutor, is effectively what Judge Cannon is saying.
And I do want to talk a little bit more about the case that did exist against President Biden here. We know that we had the report come out, no criminal charges were filed there. So did that have any sort of, I guess, impact on this decision here? Did that factor in any way, the fact that no charges were going to be filed against President Biden? Is that then to say, well, we shouldn't file charges against Trump either?
Well, the case against President Biden with regard to his handling of classified records and Donald Trump, in many regards, are kind of apples to apples. But there are some elements of them that could be considered kind of apples to oranges, things that are different along the way. And in some respects, the President Biden mishandling of classified records is worse than President Trump's. That's specifically because some of those records that President Biden had actually go back to his time as vice president or at his time in the Senate, where he would not have had the same protections under the Presidential Record Act or under the basic kind of definitions of who has the right to classified documents. As I said earlier, a president of the United States is the classification authority, not the vice president, not a senator. They don't have the same authority that they have. So in some regards, President Biden doesn't even have a colorable argument to have those documents. And then the manner in which they were held, Donald Trump has been accused of holding these records in a very negligent or a careless way in a bathroom at Mar-a-Lago or in another study or another room within Mar-a-Lago. A lot of critique was had in the media about how he was holding those records. Well, Joe Biden had those documents in a garage. Now, the special counsel that was appointed in President Biden's case came back and said that President Biden effectively is not competent to stand trial due to his age and his mental infirmity. And that's something that is a major factor in that decision. Now, the Biden administration and his folks said that that was an inappropriate statement by the special counsel in that case, but that was one of the reasons why they didn't prosecute that in the first place. So you have to take that with kind of heavy consideration. Additionally, they said that President Biden shouldn't be prosecuted because he cooperated with the FBI. That's another, I think, trap in looking at the comparison of these cases, because the idea of cooperating with FBI is an after-the-fact issue. It's a matter in mitigation. Perhaps it doesn't make it as serious in the eyes of a sentencing authority, but it has no change as to whether the original crime did or did not take place. So that's not a separate kind of evaluation here. So I think that these cases are very similar. I don't know that Judge Cannon specifically looked at the outcome or the way in which the Biden classified investigation took place compared to Donald Trump. As I said, the decision here is over 90 pages. And so I jumped on here to give you the basics as to what this decision says. We're going to have to dig deep into there and see exactly where Judge Cannon is finding some of the legal or factual points of interest in how she reached her determination.
And my final question here before I let you go, I mean, you kind of already touched on this, but what do we wait for to happen next? What is the next step in really all of this?
Well, when a decision like this comes down and it does end the case effectively, it's a dismissal of the case. And so now what the prosecutors can do is they can go back to the judge and ask that she reconsider her decision, pointing out perhaps some areas of law or facts that they think she got wrong. Oftentimes, a judge will reconsider if they can point to something that seems to be inconsistent or improper, so that the judge can essentially create a better record. But whether or not the reconsideration takes place, then this will go up on appeal to the circuit court. The circuit court is the first layer of appellate court in the federal courts, and the appellate court will take a look at it. That will take many months. It could take as little as just a couple if they put this on a highly expedited schedule, but it will likely take many more months, probably beyond the election, before the appellate court comes out with a decision. And then it goes then it goes potentially to the Supreme Court. And we do think that there is a division within the Supreme Court about how they view the appointment of special counsel. And so then that goes through a whole briefing schedule, an argument schedule, and then the decision timeline that the Supreme Court goes through. And that is a lengthy process. So it could be next summer before we even hear anything from the Supreme Court if that case continues to weave its way through the courts. Now, if former President Trump becomes elected again, he's likely to withdraw all appeals and cancel that case entirely, and that case will just kind of fall off the radar. But at this point, it is now subject to a number of layers of appeal.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to break this down. I know all of the details are just coming out, so there is still a lot to read when you come to the document, and then there's a lot to figure out. So thank you again for taking the time to jump on here. Is there anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
Well, there is so much more to that Florida classified case that this does not encapsulate. So there is many more factual and legal issues that could have been brought to light if this had gone forward, even despite the appointment of Jack Smith. We aren't getting to those answers right now. So this is just a preliminary issue that essentially dismisses this case. Even if that decision was wrong, there will be many, many more layers of issues that will have to be assessed on this classified case before there's any chance that it gets to trial. And I think there's no chance that this could go to trial before the election. This is likely dead in the water.
All right, Andrew, thank you again for taking the time to join us here and break it all down. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody, and I do want to take you right here to this post just coming in from Trump on Truth Social. I told you he was likely to speak out, and here we have it. Take a look. He says, as we move forward in uniting our nation after the horrific events on Saturday, this dismissal of the lawless indictment in Florida should be just the first step, followed quickly by the dismissal of all the witch hunts, the January 6th hoax in Washington, D.C., the Manhattan DA's zombie case, the New York AG scam, fake claims about a woman I never met, a decades-old photo in a line with her then husband does not count, and the Georgia perfect phone call charges. The Democrat Justice Department coordinated all of these political attacks, which are an election interference conspiracy against Joe Biden's political opponent, me. Let us come together to end all weaponization of our justice system and make America great again.